Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Aspire32, and this is your friend Dr. Suresh Shenvi here. Today we have a very important podcast, which even I was surprised when, or I was excited in a way when I listened to it. The thought process behind this may be a career option or maybe a different idea for a dental student, and for this we have our own alumni from our institute, that is Dr. Pragya Singh, who finished VDS at our institute, and then now she is working in CIE Triple IT Hyderabad. And I welcome Dr. Pragya to the Aspire 32.
Thank you for this opportunity, sir.
Frankly speaking, when I heard about these incubation centers and maybe like this can be an option for any student, maybe I'm sure it may be applicable to various sectors. But can you tell me in a simple way what exactly do you do at your center?
So I would put it in a very simple terminology like this, sir. It's basically like a school for people or companies who want to work on some idea which will help solve some problem. It may be a small problem or it may be a big problem, but how important is that problem to be solved determines the importance of that idea. For example, if you take as per from the perspective of the dentistry, like if you are making a composite build-up, so now we have templates for that. So where you can use the size templates and it makes the job easier. So that was basically a problem existing and somebody thought over how to minimize it or how to make it easier for the students to understand or for the practicing dentists to make it easier. So that is basically what is the idea of the startup innovation system, or where I work is basically an institute or collaboration with the institute. There's this place called Incubator, derived basically from the name itself, incubation. Like we basically incubate the ideas at a very initial level. We make people understand how they can evolve on that idea, how they can develop it, how they can take it to the market, and how it can be commercialized. And we help them financially also in making this idea possible, and we guide them on how they can get other financial aids either from the government or various existing programs where government is trying to promote more of the entrepreneurship in India.
Okay. So this is quite interesting, and Dr. Pragya here, I know, it is something different than the dentistry. And before discussing about this incubation center, and I got a faint idea, it is something related to that you maybe in like a research. What we do, we have a research idea, and then it is more about growing that idea and commercializing it. This is what I can take the message from your conversation. But I want to know that, because the channel is about the understanding the journey of these people who are doing different in various aspects of dentistry, and you are currently doing something different. How did this thought arise in your mind that okay, I can go and join there? Why did you not take a conventional pathway, or what was different? What motivated you to go here?
I came in contact with one of the startups. So when I moved in here, I met a couple of people. Like I just became friends with a couple of founders from startup ecosystem. So that was just by instance. But when I became friends with them and I spoke with them, so I found it very interesting. That entire ecosystem was way different from the healthcare background or healthcare ecosystem from where I was coming. So it was very intriguing for me to understand it and to know more and to explore the opportunities in that particular ecosystem. So that's when I started realizing like there are a lot of engineering people or there are other line people who are actually into healthcare. So if we start looking in the market, like most of the healthcare products are generally launched by people who are not from healthcare background. They are either from the business background or from engineering background, or even for that matter, they can be from any different background. But usually, most of the healthcare people usually prefers the clinical practices. So after realizing that fact, I came across with one of the founders who was just starting up on working on his idea. So I associated with them, I was working with them for 5 months. At that point of time, I was just trying to understand the basics on how the business runs, on how uh, because for me, all these terminologies were very new. I never understood what does a startup mean. I don't know what a startup actually does. So I tried understanding what actually is a startup, what actually is a product, what is actually the business, and how the finances of running these kinds of businesses work.
So here I'm still, there are two things which
Mhm.
I want to understand from you here, especially my viewers. This podcast needs to cover two things so that it can be helpful to them. One,
Hmm.
suppose there is a fresh undergraduate student,
Hmm.
then he wants to work in this incubator center, as you mentioned, and
Yes.
you did explain
Yes.
briefly what exactly an incubation center. Basically, that is something which supports a startup, right?
Yes. Yes.
So you are into this and you are not running the startup, you are supporting that. Your role is
Yes.
more about managing the incubation center than you are not into a
Yes.
startup, right? Am I
No.
right?
Yes. I'm not currently into a startup.
Yes. So one thing which you have to discuss here is
Mm-hmm.
how what is the job profile like, what is
Mm-hmm.
your day like working as a, in
Hmm.
this incubator center, and we'll try to understand what exactly incubator center means, which you try to explain. But if there is
Yes.
something to cover, something to be covered in detail, we'll discuss that. Second
Hmm.
part is how these startups, maybe what is the role of a startup for an
Mm-hmm.
undergraduate student or a
Mm-hmm.
postgraduate student.
Okay.
So can you start with that first aspect?
For my role in the incubate, like my job in
Yes.
the
What is
incubator,
what is
how
the
it is.
day like for you? What exactly you do as a incubation center?
Sure. So, one another interesting thing about this job is like you don't have a set defined role, in the sense you don't have to. It's not like if you're in a finance department, you just have to deal with finance, or you are in program departments, you just have to deal with that. So it's more like a holistic view of the entire incubator you have to see. So for that, I'll maybe break down into what are the major things which we deal with, or what are the major aspects of the role which you have to understand. So there's one thing is finance and investments, where usually we help the startups by supporting them through some financial money. That might be the accelerator centers money, or that might be the government's grants which comes. There are various schemes which are channelized through incubator centers. So incubator centers serves as the distributing point for the startups. So that is one part of it. Second part of it is programs, where basically it's like school for startups. You assign them a mentor. That mentor can be a business mentor. That mentor can be a technical mentor, or that mentor can be helping them understand their market segments. So it's basically you understand the needs of the startups, what they are actually looking for, and what they actually need help with. Based on that, you connect them to the relevant people. So those can be mentors, those can be investors, those can be anybody who will be able to help them through those things. So sometimes, for example, it's like a startup come, the founder might be very new in the ecosystem. So even for understanding the regulatory mechanism, especially if it's a health tech or medtech startups, there are a lot of regulatory guidelines which they need to follow. So sometimes that is very new for them to understand and to find out how to go forward with it. So our job is to make them understand and connect them to the government agencies, or wherever required, to the necessary people to understand it and take it forward. So these are the major two things. One is where you help them financially. Second is where you help them in programs. The third part of it is where you provide them the various accessory facilities which will basically help them to sustain or help them grow their startup or products. So it's like, to a certain aspect, we provide them space. So infrastructure is a very huge cost for any company to bear, or the rental rates. So usually if you are a part of incubator center and you are taking some space there, so that serves as your office. So your cost also is little lesser than the commercial spaces which you take otherwise outside. Second, it's a community based model. The whole idea of ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, is it's a very community driven ecosystem. So the more you sit in a place where you have other founders, where you talk to as many people, the more learning you get, because it's more of a community learning. Another point for startup, it is important, is the more you have been an incubator center, or there is a backing, or you have received some amount from any accelerator. So incubator and accelerator are basically same places. So if you have received the amount, it's a validation for your product, because you have gone through certain process and you have received that money that validates your product in the market. So like if it's a health tech startup and they have been with us for a while and they were part of our program, so it will help them to connect to the like doctors or to the hospitals which are in our panel. So that those kinds of connects and community providing that connects is another thing which is very important for the startups. So these would be the basic areas I would say we help the startups with, and dealing with any of it is part of my job each day. Means one day I can't be dealing with a compliance issue where I need to explain startup how the paperwork for filing with the registrar of company has to be done, or we have to tell them how their company is valued, at what price their company is valued, and how their shares can be purchased, or what would be the amount for their shares. It can be explaining them which mentor would be good for them, or what kind of mentor they would need, and what kind of people we would connect them to, or explaining them how to even sign up like for a net facility, or what some booking a space for meetings. So it's like down from any small job to a bigger higher thing, you will have to do everything. So it's like one, you have to be one complete person knowing entire aspects of the ecosystem and how you can support startups. So it's like one person to know all the answer to the problems if the startup is coming in. If they are in the building, you are answerable to any of the questions they ask, and any of the problems they have, you have to give a solution to it. So basically
Okay.
that sums up my
So
day.
this, yeah. So what I have understood with your detailed explanation, that one thing is very clear now with this explanation. What is the incubation center? That I have understood
Yeah.
very clearly now.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
listening to this explanation, it means you may have to let go your if you want to work at the incubation center as the
mhm,
your post. It is like you have to let go your dentistry.
mhm,
Is that right?
mhm. I wouldn't say that, sir. It's more of I'll say it's a personal, very personal choice. If somebody want to still keep doing the practice, you can absolutely keep doing the practice, because we have a lot of people these days in the ecosystem who are still clinicians. It may be MBBS or dentistry. They are part of ecosystem, but they still stick to their clinical practices. So it's basically what aspect out of this you choose to be part of. So this is one aspect. That was from the aspect where I am working in the incubation center. But if there are other aspects where in different ways you can associate with startup ecosystem. So major ways of it is advisory. You are from a medical background, your expert area or your technical expertise is the medicine, or the specialist you are for. So anybody developing product in that particular area would need your help. So there are many doctors who are in our panel as advisories. So we connect them to the medtech startups when they come to us, to help them identify, actually, is this a problem in the market? Is this the right way to approach the patients? Or because it's more like they are developing a product which will be used by a doctor. So doctor needs to validate it. So sometimes they need to connect to multiple doctors, sometimes in their entire panel. So it's basically like, I'll say, if you go to the, I didn't like, if you do analysis of Practo, means that's a very common known startup which most of the people know, because it was for aggregating the practitioners on a platform. So it's like basically, when if you're trying to develop something like Practo, they would have done a survey with a lot of doctors to understand what is their need. So there would have been somebody always guiding them how to do it, how to proceed with it, and what are the needs. So such ways, there are many startups, like the startups which are in diagnosis specifically always needs doctors to see whether the diagnosis result is coming good or not, how the patient approach will be, what are the technical problems the startup will actually face when they're trying to solve this. So it basically depends on what aspect you choose to be in. The second aspect is the second aspect is as an investor. So there are a lot of doctors these days who are investing in startups. So they only do one thing. They will pick the startup which they feel aligns with their knowledge and their understanding, and they will invest money in that. And you are on their advisory board. You help them develop their product. So it is always said, it's always good to have investors who know what you're doing. So it's a win-win for both people. You get a mentor and you get an investor both. So there are many doctors who are very famous investors also. I'm forgetting the name. From Mumbai, we have a very famous heart surgeon. He is known in the circle for investing in medtech startups. So it's more like what side you want to pick.
Okay. No, I understood it clearly. There are various aspects. One thing is, you can be a part of that office or maybe that role, or you may be someone from outside as an advisory. So yeah, it is very clear now. Now, since we have discussed the role as it is more like it is like a teamwork, as you have mentioned. You have multiple ways in the incubation center. The next important thing is why the startup concept is very important. Why do you think, if suppose they don't want to, shift from dentistry and get a job as what in incubator center, a full-time job, something like that. That's a different aspect. The second aspect is you are a dentist. Okay, you are a dentist, and now I want to understand why this startup is very important. Why do you think, for example, what is the scope of exploring opportunities outside the clinical practice?
So I would say there are many people who continue to keep doing their practice, and side by side they want to work on their idea. So it is important because now when the things are evolving and over the period of evolution, if see from my understanding or my perspective, what I understood being here was previously it was more important, people used to prefer stable jobs. So there was a time when people used to run behind government jobs. Then there came an era of MNCs and private companies. Now if we see, there is all about startups. Everybody is trying to understand startups. So it's more like, as per the need, the system and the economics is evolving. So the current scenario, it's like more of the thing where everybody's trying to solve something. So it's because people are not contented with what they have, they always want something better. So that uh, whole zeal to approach and to improve on whatever we have is very important right now. And the second point why it is important is, it is very important part of economical self sustainability. Like the more you give people the job, the more the people are entrepreneurs, the more there are opportunities in the country for the growth. And it's more like, if there is one startup, there will be another 5 6 startups on the same thing. So when there's a competition, there's always a better product. So at the end, the consumer is always going to benefit. And second thing, like answering from the perspective whether you have to leave your clinical practice or not, it's absolutely not required. There are many people who at certain point want to work on their idea. And I am like personally knowing few of them from the incubator center, that you can keep on doing your clinical practice. You can parallelly work on your idea as long as you have a set plan for it, like you have a clarity on how you want to take it. And it takes time to understand what actually you want to do, because being a clinician, it is actually advantageous for you to start a product which is in the clinical aspect, because you will have the advantage over a person who is coming from a non-medical background to understand that problem and that solution better. So more problem which happens is, we still don't have a holistic kind of approach or collaborations which we don't get, because usually the products which anybody is trying to develop, it involves some technology. So that overlapping, where a doctor and an engineer has to work hand in hand, is something which happens with difficulty, because finding that kind of person who will understand your idea and who will work along with it with you on it is something difficult. But if you can do that, it's a perfect thing to be, because you will be the technical domain expertise. Another person is also a technical domain expertise. You can tell them what exactly you want. You can get them the data required for that. You can tell them from the health perspective everything, and those people can develop it. So it's absolutely not required that you leave your clinical practice. Being in your clinical practice, you can always work on your idea. It may be a small idea or big idea, but what is more important is you start working on your idea. Most of the time, people don't the first point is hesitation. People are hesitated to try something different because most of the time they never used to find support around them to that encouragement that you should try it. But I feel now there is enough of the change and enough of the people are moving from the conventional lines. Like I've seen people who leave their well settled jobs, like people coming from engineering backgrounds who in their 45 50s they had like a very high paid job, they leave it just to pursue their idea. So it's more like that first of all, that social dilemma is always there, because I still face that. Sometimes people ask me still, why did you leave dentistry? Like that was the 5 years you invested and why did you leave it? So I had my reasons, and I tell people because I didn't want to pursue it and do it for the remaining of the years where I can experiment and find something more interesting for me. So that is one dilemma I felt most of the time medical professional people face, because they are asked this question more than engineers, because most of the time engineers are never working on what they study, but it is expected from medical people that they should work on what they study. So that is changing now slowly, because there are many people who are not doing that. I have around me so many people who have changed their line. So even if you're not changing, you should work on your idea. It's absolutely not required that you leave your clinical practice to work on your idea, as long as you are able to balance the time and you have a roadmap, you have a mind map that, okay, this is how I want to work on my idea. Like take your time, think about it. It may be 6 months, 1 year. It is a long process. Definitely it's a long process, especially if it's in medical. It's a long process to give out a product because it goes through trials, it goes through its phases and everything. But it is something which is very doable in the beginning phase along with your clinical practice. When it becomes heavy, when you feel you can't balance both, that is when you can take some break from your clinical practice, focus full time on your idea. If it doesn't work out, your clinical practice is always there.
So now, after again listening to you, now it has become clear that suppose I have an idea. Suppose okay, I want to develop, for example, take some instrument. So with this instrument, I will go and I will approach an incubation center. I will tell them this is my idea. I want to develop an instrument. The incubation center will help you with all the formalities, maybe find some finances for me, right? And they will help you to grow this idea and maybe then manufacture by connecting you to some other, companies, like all the required, facilities.
Yes.
Since it is difficult to do this on your own, you have these incubation centers which are helping you.
Yes.
Then, once it is commercialized, you market the product, and then you are getting the benefit of whatever sales of this product what you have done, right? So this is that idea of startup and the role of incubation center, and your role will be dependent on which junction you are standing.
Yes.
Whether
absolutely.
you are at a startup or you are at an incubation center. So those people who are listening to this podcast, this is a bit confusing, but many of you may end up having an idea, and that's why Dr. Pragya is very important. This podcast is very important because she is telling you that if you have an idea apart from your clinical practice and if you are hesitant to do that, to grow that idea, that is where the incubation center helps. Is that right, Dr. Pragya?
Yes.
Okay. So now I have another one question also, that what are the various schemes and approach towards this entrepreneurship? Because it is like you are an entrepreneur when you have an idea. That is how your role is. So can you throw some light on this?
So what I would say, sir, being in the if you are only in healthcare sector, like when I came from dentistry, these things were very new for me. So there is always a basic learning which anybody who is trying to pursue their idea, they would need to do, like basic learning about the life cycle of startups. And like these are the things which are available anywhere on the net. Like you search there are two important things to understand: how the investment works and how the product life cycle works. These are the two most important things for any budding entrepreneur to understand. Like investments is basically how you are gonna support your idea financially. Like when you're starting, from where you're gonna get money, and how you are going to grow it, and how in the market does it work, how to go and pitch to someone to give you money, and like why they should give you money. You need to be strong in that skill in explaining your idea so that somebody is convinced to put money in your idea. So there's a whole process for it. So initially it is, you will have to fund your own product. That is the basis. Like initial few months or up to a year, it's like you have to fund it. First you have to fund it. So it's more like a validation that you're serious about your idea, because you have put in that much of your effort, your time, and your money. Then comes the other investors. There's a sequence of how you raise the investment. So those people come in on how they can help you in raising money or carrying out your idea. So apart from this, when you're planning to work on your idea, you have to understand there are certain segments. Like when you're talking in respect to the market terms, which might be new for most of the people not coming from this background. So those are some terminologies, basic terminologies you'll have to understand. Because even if you go to an incubation center, they're going to use terms like asking which stage is your product in, which stage your idea is in, or which stage is your startup in. So you have to know these stages. Like, so there's idea stage, there's POC stage, there's MVP stage. So these all terms are very new for people who are not from this background. So this is basically just the understanding that when you're developing your product. So if I'll say it out in a very simple explanatory form, what could be the stages and how people need to understand this to convey. So it's like where you have a thought. You just have a thought of developing something. That is basically your idea stage. Then it's more like you have a thought and you're doing a survey on your thought, that do people really need it, or if you have any such things. So most of the times we see there are certain feature surveys which we get. Sometimes Google asks, would you want this kind of feature to be incorporated in this app? That's basically where you are doing a idea validation. That is basically idea validation stage. And then point after that point on, when you have validated this and you're developing, so then there is proof of concept. So it's basically saying you have validated your idea, and now you are basically writing like a research paper on your idea. So from where you are getting, okay, my research is valid, okay, somebody has already done this kind of work, or this actually exists, or this actually matters. And after this comes a stage which we call MVP, or minimum viable product. This basically says that you have completed your research. Now you're making what you have written in your research, you're actually carrying it out in an experimental way, and you get something at the end of it. That is your minimum viable product. So it's basically like saying when you are doing a genetically modified organism, and you have made that organism by the process, and in the end that first being which comes out of it, whether it survives or not is a different question, but that first being which comes out of it is MVP, minimum viable product. Means that thing at least is in a position where it is viable. After this you develop your prototype. So it's basically then you realize your MVP might have certain flaws, so you remove. So if it's a genetically mutated animal, there's certain flaws in the DNA, so you try to change that and incorporate other proteins to make a being which can survive. So that would be like your prototype. So these are certain things which people need to understand when they're trying to have their own idea. So these are basic two aspects which is very important for anybody to understand: the business part of it, like the from where you have to just understand from where the money will come and from where the money will go. So you just have to understand that balance from where money is coming and how you're going to spend it. And second thing is how you're going to make your product and how you're going to convey to anybody. So these are some basic things which I suggest, like anybody who is thinking of starting also working on your idea. These are some basic self-teachings people will have to do. So that is important to do.
Well, now I have understood, Dr. Pragya, what exactly is this incubation center and the startup mean, because you have given such a in-depth information, and I'm sure those who are watching it for the first time may feel, may feel the topic is a little bit different, but this is an interesting concept for someone who has really a good idea and wants to market it. And of course, you have been mentioning multiple times that, and it is important for everyone that when they are talking about funding, okay, you mentioned that initially it has to be self-funded, then you can maybe approach few people. How easy is it? Can you give me some more information regarding that?
Sure, absolutely. So I wouldn't say it would be very easy. So it's basically like you are saying so if I'll do a comparative study with maybe investing in stock market. So if you say there's X percent of risk in investing in stock market, that is 100x in investing in a startup. So basically you're asking somebody to put their money at such a high risk. So you will need really good skills, and they will also judge based on how is your knowledge and how is your team, the people who are working along with you, how good they are at what they are doing, and how how well you are able to convey what you are actually doing, and how much confidence you reflect that you will be able to do this. So these are few things which any investors look in the founders. And the best is if you have some customers, or if you have somebody actually using a product, that is the best testimony any founder or any startup can have to get funding. So most of the times investors will look at certain parameters. So the basic parameters are these only: how is the team, how is the need of the product in the market, and do they really have competition. So it's said more like, if you don't have a competitor in the market, either you are ahead of your time or you're behind your time. So you definitely need to have competition in market. There needs, so because most of the time what we come across is the fear which people have is why they don't speak about their idea, or why they don't share their idea, is somebody will steal my idea. So I have learned in 2 years one saying: if you have thought it, then another 1,000 people must have already thought
Already
about
thought
it.
it.
It's not unique.
That
It's
is
not
so
unique.
true.
Yes.
That is so true. Yes, it is
Yes.
like
So
you think whenever we are thinking of doing some research, we read an
yes,
article, we think, okay, this point is missing in this.
yes,
Did I find something new? But then you go and
yes,
search in the literature, you know that there are already someone who has already done it. That's why
yes,
doing research is so difficult.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So absolutely the same comparison. And then when you don't want to share your research, you will be just stuck with it, because until you don't go and say and talk to people, you wouldn't actually know what to do with it. When you discuss it with people, you'll realize how you can modify it and actually do something different out of it. So that's the same thing even here. Like when you have an idea, it's very important that you discuss it. You do a survey on it. You act, because until it is with you, you will keep on thinking. You will be have a bias, but from your perspective, you think this is a problem which needs to be solved. And most of the time, you will go and ask people who are in your close circle, and they always say yes. Nobody in India will say no, no, I won't use this product. At that point of time, everybody will say, yeah, yeah, it's something like this is there, I will use it. But it's important to actually face the real world, where you ask people who don't know you, would you use this, to actually understand whether your idea is actually worth putting the time, effort and money or not. So you have to move out of your comfort zone. As long as you're scared to listen to a no, it will be very difficult for you to succeed with your idea. It's very important that the more no's you listen, the higher the probabilities of you exploring. And so it's said, it's like you might start with the A. You will think, I'm going to make A at the end of my product is A. My idea is to make A. By the time your product will become, it will be Z. So that is how the journey happens. That you might think, I am making apple curry and at the apple pie, and at the end you might be doing something shredding with the apple, and you might be using apple in some other way. So that is how the idea evolves. So it's very commonly said in the startup ecosystem, if you're thinking you're going to make this, it is not even going to look like this at the end of the goal. You might have one line at the beginning, you wanted to make a line. At the end, you might be making some figure with all sorts of images. So it's like that. So it's very important that you discuss. And for convincing for funding, the more you have gone through all this, the more hassle you have taken, the more you have gathered the perspective from other people, and you have actually understood the market. It helps you to convince the investors, because they can understand you have done your background job. You have actually surveyed the market. You actually know what is needed in the market and what is existing in the market. So it's very important your competition, because then only you will know what you can improve in your product, because it is not there in your competitor.
So I want to now I know it is a complicated topic and we have spoken a lot already. At last, what is your message to the dentist or dental students who are watching this podcast?
My message to them is specifically that do not restrict yourself because you have a degree of dentistry. That does not define what you can do professionally. You can do anything. It does not require any degree to make something what you want to do. It just requires the passion to self learn. That is all what is needed.